OJU rules have meant for UK companies, and I just saw examples the other day up in Teesside of how fantastic British business was finding it very difficult to develop our potential in wind turbine technology because of OJU rules. There are ways in which we will be able to do things differently and better. And on state aid, so you might like to know, John, that the ramifications of EU state aid rules are felt everywhere. And I talked to companies that are or local government or schools that are trying, for instance, to run bus services where they take in some contribution from the passengers. What they find is that they fall foul of state aid rules insofar as they may be deemed, therefore, to be competing with private hire vehicles or private bus companies of one kind or another. So that, buses taking kids to school or helping to move disadvantaged people around the community are facing real difficulties because of some EU state aid rules. What we will be able to do is be more flexible, be more pragmatic, but also maintain a level playing field.
Thank you very much. And Beth Rigby from Sky News.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, a couple of things just to follow up from John. Just to be clear, if you don't get a deal by the end of 2020, and I know you're confident you will, but if you don't, are we still leaving with no deal if necessary? That's my first question. Just on a follow-up on the tampon tax. You say that you're going to scrap this as a benefit of Brexit, that you're backing women. But what about women who are single mums? As a younger man, you describe children of single mums as ill-raised, ignorant, aggressive and illegitimate. That's how you've described millions of your own citizens. How can they vote for you if that's what you think of them? Thank you.
Beth, as I've said before, millions of words that I've written, you'll find everybody is able to find some that they can cull from the text and twist them and distort them in whatever way that they choose. Actually, on the substantive point that you raise, of course we have a massive opportunity. And yes, of course, we will be doing things to cut VAT on sanitary products. Quite right. Why not? We should be. It's a freedom that this country will have. We'll be able to do free ports. We'll do loads of things differently and better. And I think the question I would really like people to focus on is this fabled New Deal that only Jeremy Corbyn backs, except he doesn't back it, that he wants to do. What single new freedom or opportunity would it give the UK even if he were able to secure that deal from Brussels? It's not at all clear to me that he'd be able to do any. He wouldn't take back control of our tariffs. He wouldn't take back control of our laws. He wouldn't take back control of our VAT. He certainly wouldn't be taking back control of our immigration policy. And yet this is the deal that is supposed to be put to the British people as the Leave offering in his referendum next year. I mean, the whole thing is utterly preposterous. We have a great deal. It allows us to come out on January the 31st. It does what people wanted. It allows us to deliver Brexit, and we're going to deliver it.
But will you leave with no deal if you can't get a trade
deal done people, by the end of December? We will look at the situation that we're in. As I said just now to John, we are in a fantastic situation. I have every confidence that we'll be able to do a great deal, a great free trade deal, not just with the EU, but with countries around the world. And we will begin straight away on January the 31st. And as I say, we have the advantage, not only that we're already in a state of harmony with the EU, but also that our friends in the EU have a very considerable trade balance surplus with us in goods of 65 billion pounds, and they have every incentive to get on with it.
And Paul Brand from ITV.
Thank you. Thank you. Since you last stood together on the morning after the referendum, you've blamed pretty much everyone for the failure to deliver Brexit, whether it's MPs, the courts, the EU, everyone that is, except for yourselves. Is any one of you willing to take responsibility for the fact that you started this project and you started it without a plan?
No, well, I'm certainly willing to take proper responsibility for the fact that we believe in. I'm sure. I mean, Michael and Gisela must speak for themselves, but I think it's a great project for this country, and it's a great shame that Parliament has impeded it for the last 3.5 years. I think it has corroded trust in democracy. If we want to get Brexit done, there's only one way forward, as Gisela has said, and that's to vote Conservative at this election. Gisela, why don't you...
I think one of the tragedies is that the alternative versions to us leaving aren't actually alternatives. They're just variation of Remain. And if I look at what, at the moment, the Labour Party, to my great regret, portrays as being options being offered, it's just various options of staying in. And we had a referendum. Voters were told that it's a once in a generation. They were told by the then Prime Minister, whatever you decide, I will do. And then we had 3.5 years of variations on the theme of how can we stop it. And I think now is the one and only chance. And this is a really, really important thing. If we don't get this over the hurdle now and get it delivered, Brexit will not happen. Let's be clear about that.
Gisela and Boris are absolutely right. I take full responsibility for all of my actions, but so should all of those MPs in the House of Commons who stood on manifestos saying that they would deliver Brexit and then, when they were elected, did everything possible to frustrate it. Boris, as Prime Minister and as Foreign Secretary, has done everything he can to get us out of the European Union. But there are people, some of whom stood as Conservatives, many of whom stood as Labour candidates, who said to the people, yep, you voted to leave, I will honour that vote. They did not. The only way that we can get Brexit done is by making sure that we have a working Conservative majority to get Parliament working again. Now, we'll take, because we want to take as many questions as possible, we'll take a group. So we'll take Francis from the Times, Dennis from the Irish Times, and Harry from the Mail on Sunday. Francis.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, Francis from the Times. I've read that 1995 Spectator column very carefully, several times. Have your views changed about single mothers and their children? And secondly, will state aid rules be, the new state aid freedoms, be devolved? Can the Scottish Government also take the same freedoms to intervene on failing companies that you want to?
Dennis Staunton from the Irish Times. Prime Minister, you said you want a level playing field with the European Union, but the measures you're proposing on state aid and public procurement are the opposite of that. And the European Union has made very clear that they won't give you a zero tariff, zero quota trade deal if you diverge in ways like this. Why do you believe it's in your country's interest to put at risk that level of market access for the sake of these measures?
And Harry Cole.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Your government has begun the process of bringing children back from northern Syria, British citizens. Do you fully support this? Was last week's operation a one-off? And is it a price worth paying to open a legal back door to ISIS fighters and their brides to possibly come back to the UK as a result of your actions?
Yeah. Thanks very much. Francis, on my previous articles, I've said a lot about that over the course of the last few weeks, and I just repeat my point. You know, you can always find bits and pieces that seem to mean one thing. In fact, almost invariably, that the article in question is saying something very different. And on your point about competition, will it be devolved? State aids, will they be devolved? No, we believe that to be a national competence, and will be retaining that nationally. And on Dennis's very good point about how is that going to be compatible with a free trade deal, well, of course it's compatible, and were there to be any issues arising, then, as you know, under any big free trade deal, there's a joint committee to arbitrate on whether some unfair subsidy or dispensation has been made. But it would be a committee of sovereign equals, as I'm sure you understand, such as exists between the EU and Canada or whatever. And on Harry's point about the children from Daesh, look, this is a very, very difficult business because there are extremely difficult military and security issues that surround this whole question. There are also difficult questions about finding exactly which children might be eligible or capable of being brought back to this country. There's a very small number, we think, that do fall into that category, Harry, and we've done what we can to help in that small category. It's not a large category, but we're doing what we can.
Do we only have any representatives from Channel 4 here? Yes, OK. We'll take the gentleman from Channel 4, and then we'll also I can't see many female colleagues. Oh, yes, I can, Heather. So we'll take the gentleman from Channel 4, Heather from The Guardian, and then Sebastian Payne from the FT.
Hello, Prime Minister. Paul McNamara from Channel 4 News. Thank you for the question. You've just said that you have every confidence of getting a deal by the end of next deal, but your opponents say the threat of no deal is still very much on the table. So quite simply, yes or no, will you end no deal preparations? Will you end the vast sums that have been spent on no deal preparations?
Well,
can we take the
sorry.
Go on, sorry. And so, next in line, Heather from The Guardian.
Hello. Is that working? Prime Minister, outside Downing Street, when you became Prime Minister, you said, we will fix the crisis in social care once and for all, and with a clear plan we have prepared to give every older person the dignity and security they deserve. 5 months later, you published your manifesto, which says you want to discuss the issue with Labour, which is not an approach you tend to take to other pressing political issues. Isn't that extraordinary political cowardice? And what do you say to those families who are facing these funding issues in social care now?
Thanks, Heather. And Sebastian Payne.
Hello, thank you. Sebastian Payne from the FT. Prime Minister, on these state aid policies you've announced today, some Brexiters talked about creating a Singapore-on-Thames, a kind of Thatcherite economy. This seems more a North Korea-style Brexit inspired by Jeremy Corbyn you're proposing here. What do you think the hardcore Thatcherites in your cabinet think about this? And also, your agreement as part of Northern Ireland locks that into EU state aid rules, so are you agreeing to have a bigger border down the Irish Sea now?
Dear Leader, your view.
Thank you very much. Thank you. On Paul's question about no deal preparations, actually I think they were thoroughly useful in many ways, but particularly useful in getting the deal that we eventually did, because I think it convinced the EU that we were in earnest about leaving. And many of those preparations will be extremely valuable as we come out of EU arrangements anyway. So I think that they're the right thing to have done and to keep in a state of readiness. But by the end of 2020, I'm also confident that we will have a great new FTA ready to go for the reasons that I've set out. And of course, the preparations will remain extant. There's no reason to dismantle them. We are coming out of the. Can I invite people not just to keep asking me supplementary questions while I'm trying to answer the next question? But as far as coming out of the EU goes, it will be necessary, obviously, to change our arrangements, our relationships, and a lot of the preparations that we have done, thanks very much to Michael in his role as Chancellor Duchy of Lancaster over the last period, have been extremely valuable and will continue to be of value. Heather asked about the crisis in social care. It is a huge national crisis, as everybody knows. We're putting massive amounts more into the NHS. This is the biggest increase in funding in the NHS in modern memory. We're increasing funding of the NHS by about 29% from 2018 to 2023. This is huge sums going in, but it's the interface between people leaving hospital, social care, that is causing real problems. So what we've done is put £1.5 billion immediately. This new government, since I've been in, has put £1.5 billion into tackling social care, helping councils tackle social care. What we're saying is we'll put another £1 billion more every year of this Parliament into recruiting the staff, the carers that we need. And yes, you're right, Heather, that we're also reaching out across politics to try to take the division out of it, because I think there is a growing national consensus about the way forward, and it's based on, I think, two principles: that everybody should have dignity and security in their old age, and nobody should pay for the costs of their care by being forced to sell their home. And that cannot be repeated too much. Seb Payne asked a question about our approach to state aids, and I just want to repeat what I said. This is not going to be I believe in competition. I believe in a level playing field, but there are distortions sometimes introduced by the OJU processes, which are extremely bureaucratic and cumbersome. We may be able to speed things up for instance, on planning processes, which would be a great benefit to the housing industry and many other parts of our economy. And I mentioned what may seem to some a relatively trivial issue, the issue of school buses and buses for the disabled, which suddenly seem to fall foul of EU state aid rules. There are going to be cases where a pragmatic approach that backs British companies, British businesses will be, British schools will be the way forward.
Do we have any colleagues here from the Scottish media? No? Okay. Yes. We'll have, exactly. We'll have Andy Bell, Christopher Hope from the Telegraph, and... Oh, yes, Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Yes.
Thank you very much. Andy Bell, 5 News. Prime Minister, you said you think the institution of the monarchy is beyond reproach. Do you still think that?
Okay. Christopher?
Chris Hope, Telegraph. Prime Minister, 2 quick questions. Theresa May hid from scrutiny in 2017, and that didn't end very well for her. Why are you hiding from Andrew Neil? And also, on behalf of Tory members, you haven't been asked yet about this. Why do you want to give MPs a chance to repeal the fox hunting ban? Why do you want to give MPs a chance to repeal the fox hunting ban?
Right, and then Jason, sorry.
Thank you. Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Your press release this morning says on state aid you want to make it faster and easier for the government to intervene to protect jobs when an industry is in trouble. Can you give us an example of a business in the last decade that's gone to the wall that you would have saved? And can I ask just quickly on what's happened to Jacob Rees-Mogg? He seems to have been exiled to a bunker in Somerset since making his comments on Grenfell. This morning you won't guarantee him in his job. Is it all over for Jacob?
Right. Okay. First, thanks very much. On Andy, the monarchy. The monarchy is the Queen. The monarchy is the Queen, and in my view, she is beyond reproach. There is a distinction between the monarchy and the royal family, and everybody will readily appreciate that. And it's an obvious definitional distinction. On Christopher Hope's question about, look, there's going to be no change at all. That's clear from the manifesto on hunting, and we will use this manifesto on the. We will certainly not be, bringing back fox hunting. That's absolutely inconceivable. What we will do is use this manifesto, use the opportunities of Brexit to champion animal welfare, and we can do things differently. I don't know whether I feel, frankly, that it's barbaric that in this country people can eat legally. They can eat shark fin soup made from the fins of sharks that have been deprived of those fins while they're alive and then thrown back into the sea. And I think that should be banned. And you can't do it at the moment under EU single market law, no more than you can ban the shipment of live animals for long periods when they're often in great distress. And people have campaigned in this country to have the freedom to do that for decades, and we will now have that freedom. And I think that you should ask, again, I invite you to ask the Labour Party, ask Mr Corbyn and the Labour Party, what is their plan here? Because they would have none of, under the deals they propose, none of those freedoms would return to this country, even under the so-called Leave deal that they're advertising. And it's, in my view, a complete outrage. I think when people realise what is being proposed, they will be furious. And on Jason's point about various members of the cabinet, I think any commentary, any further commentary about that, Jason, would be rightly categorised by people as me being overconfident about this election, measuring up the curtains. This is going to be a very close-fought election. We're fighting for every vote, and Jacob Rees-Mogg and the rest of the cabinet, to the best of my knowledge, in very good health and fighting hard right now for a re-election.
And on the state aid point, have you got an example?
Oh, sorry, I don't want to get into discussion of individual companies.
It wouldn't be fair on individual companies to look back retrospectively. And I think we'll have to take our final selection of 3 questions, and the 3 gentlemen right at the back, starting there. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's Matthew Holhouse from MLEX. Prime Minister, I want to ask about China and UK investment policy. Your manifesto says nothing about tightening up the rules on national security screening for foreign investment and takeovers. As you know, your predecessor was very keen on tightening this up, and the UK's allies around the world are tightening up their own investment screening. Can we conclude that you're fairly content with the regime as it is, or will you be making it a priority to review those takeover rules? Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Prime Minister, you've given very little detail about fuel duty, no mention in the manifesto. Can you reassure motorists they won't see the first rise in a decade? And just on national insurance, the tax cut you offered, how are you personally going to spend your £85 next year?
And yes, and gentleman just next to Matt.
Hi, Prime Minister. Emilia Kazalico from Politico.eu. 3 quick questions. Firstly, will you meet Donald Trump when he comes to the UK next week, or are you worried that he might blow up your election campaign? Secondly, you said last night that you've never lied in your political career, but were you not sacked by Michael Howard in 2014 for lying about an extramarital affair that you had? And before you answer quickly, that's not about MPs delivering Brexit or Brexit. It's a question about your personal conduct. And thirdly, can you name one thing that you like and respect about Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah. Okay.
Barrel load of questions there. I'll hand over to Prime Minister in a second, but the one thing, just in response to Matthew's question, that I want to say is that it is the case that within the Cabinet Office there is a specific unit that looks at potential takeovers and screens them for security reasons. And I and the Cabinet Office Minister, Oliver Dowden, had undertaken to strengthen that unit and to strengthen protections in the future. But you appreciate, given the sensitivity of these cases, I can't say more than that. But we certainly don't believe that the current provisions which are in place are robust enough. And I'll hand over to the Prime Minister and to Gisela for the last words.
And just on that, I obviously think Michael is right. There is a balance to be struck between continuing to be open to investment from China, which I think is very important for this country, and we will continue to do that and to build a trading partnership with China. But clearly we can't do anything that prejudices our critical national infrastructure, our security, or do anything that would compromise our ability to cooperate with Five Eyes security partners. So those are the parameters. I'm very, very far from a Sinophobe. I want to have good relations with China, but there are clear difficulties and clear boundaries that we have to set. And on Matt's question, well, look, Matt, everybody in this country is going to get, or every taxpayer is going to get a tax cut. 31 million people will benefit from the cut in national insurance. We're also going to cut taxes on businesses, on SMEs. That's the right way forward. We are a tax-cutting government. We don't want to raise fuel duty. I have absolutely no intentions to raise fuel duty. And on Emilio, and by the way, I must have missed the opportunity to contrast our approach with the catastrophic sledgehammer that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party would take to the UK economy. And it would mean huge tax rises for working people. It would mean everybody paying £2,400 more in tax. His prospectus is economically ruinous. And the crucial thing is that, of course, it's not just the burden of taxation. It's what would happen to the interest rates that the market charges on this country's debts. And they would go up, and that would push up the burden of mortgages for everybody in the UK. It is not the right way forward. Never forget, every time Labour leave office, they leave the public finances in ruins. That's what they did last time, and they always leave unemployment higher than when they came in. And as I said before, the only difference between Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell is they propose to start with an economic crisis rather than end up with one. As for Emilio Casalicchio's question about NATO, I'm obviously going to be hosting the NATO leaders meeting and look forward to meeting all the NATO heads of government coming to that meeting. And on your point about trust, let me just repeat what I've said before. I do not set out to mislead the electorate in my policies, in what I set out to achieve. If you look at my record over the last 10 years, when I've set out to do something, I've gone at it with as much energy and determination and work as I can. Time and time again, we've not only delivered, but over-delivered. That's one of the reasons I'm so frustrated at the moment about what's happening with Brexit and with this Parliament. And I repeat, the single thing that has undermined and corroded trust in politics has been the failure over the last 3.5 years to deliver Brexit. We've got to get on and do it and take the country forward.
Thank you. Gisela, anything else you wanted to add?
I just want to reiterate that whilst quite a number of things have changed since in those 3.5 years since we last shared a podium and came together on a cross-party basis, but the one thing which hasn't changed is we still have not left the European Union. The only way to deliver Brexit is by now voting for Boris Johnson on the 12th of December, not because if you voted leave and you're a traditional Labour voter, you've suddenly become a Tory. That does not make you a Tory. What it does mean is if you voted leave and you want to deliver this, then that is the only way to produce a clear majority. And that's why we're here today, and do not lose sight of that basic message.
I want to thank you all for coming. I just want to stress that the Prime Minister has been on this platform now for more than 45 minutes. He's taken questions, more questions, I think, than any party leader has taken at any press conference during the course of this general election. I think so, yes, during the course of this general election campaign. And so the Prime Minister has a message which is clear, and it's one that has been underlined by Gisela. And I think Gisla's courage, as someone who is a lifelong Labour member, who's dedicated her life to the Labour Party, but who is first and foremost a Democrat, Gisla's courage and her public service is an example to us all. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Get Brexit done.